Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for stopping by, and today is this week's episode of Trash Talk, where I read critiques of famous composers by their contemporaries. Most of these are pretty scathing, sometimes even hateful. The ironic thing is that for all of these critiques and bashing from reviewers, contemporaries, musical critics, these works have stood the test of time and are still some of the most recognizable operas, instrumental pieces, symphonies of all time. Today, I'm going to start with a critique of Bizet's Carmen. Carmen is probably the most popular opera over the course of the last few hundred years since it was written. Something to note about Carmen was that it was not an immediate success. As a matter of fact, at the time, would have been considered a flop. And it wasn't until after Bizet had passed away, it had a successful run, and as I said, became probably the most popular opera of all time. Now, the plot of Carmen deals with a very strong, independent woman who is the lead, who sets her sights on Don José and ends in tragedy. This was also the first instance of theater where a murder occurs on stage. Typically, most of those sorts of things would have happened off stage and would have been implied or talked about by the characters. But in this case, it happens right on the stage, which is part of the reason that it did not do very well in the beginning. This was a family theater and people were appalled. The other interesting thing to note is that the lead character, Carmen, like I said, is a very strong, independent woman. She lives a rather bohemian lifestyle, chooses to love who she wants to love, seduces men at their own peril. By today's standards, we wouldn't consider Carmen's behaviors to be anything out of the ordinary. However, at that time, it was quite scandalous. And as we'll see from this review, even more scandalous than that of prostitution. This critique is from Music Trade Review in London on June 15, 1878. If it were possible to imagine His Satanic Majesty writing an opera, Carmen would be the sort of work he might be expected to turn out. After hearing it, we seem to have been assisting in some unholy rites. Weirdly fascinating but painful. It is difficult to say that a great portion of the music resembles that of Venusberg in Tannhauser, as being at once forbidding and alluring. But here, the similarity ends. Tannhauser is intensely human, but the dramatis personae in Carmen are no types of living beings. The characters evoke no interest in the spectators, nay, more, they are eminently repulsive. It is another La Traviata, with the redeeming features which may be discovered in that libretto carefully eliminated. The heroine is an abandoned woman, destitute not only of any vestige of morality, but devoid of the ordinary feelings of humanity, soulless, heartless, and fiendish. Indeed, so repulsive was the subject of this opera that some of the best artists in Paris declined to be included in the cast. So again, like I said, Carmen, the epitome of the scandalous woman. Her sexuality was given freely rather than as prostitution or courtesans at that time. There could be this idea that they were forced into that lifestyle. She chose to be with who she wanted to be with. Terrible, isn't it? So as was mentioned, La Traviata in the previous critique, let's talk about that one just a little bit. La Traviata is based on a novel, a French novel, and is the story of a courtesan, very, very fancy lady, very high-end, who falls in love, as you shouldn't, and the aftermath of giving up the lifestyle and so forth. If you've ever seen Moulin Rouge, it's based on the same story. This was written by Giuseppe Verdi, and the London Spectator, quoted in the London Times on August 4th, 1856, had this to say: "The favorite opera of the season has been La Traviata. The highest society in England has thronged to the opera house night after night to see a very young and innocent-looking lady impersonate the heroine of an infamous French novel who varies her prostitution by a frantic passion." Verdi's music, which generally descends below his subjects, can in this case claim the ambiguous merit of being quite worthy of the subject. We should have thought that the production of La Traviata an outrage on the ladies of aristocracy who support the theater, if they had not been crowding their boxes every night, that they did not notice the underlying vice of the opera. It looks like this guy has got some things to say about, the subject matter. These ladies of aristocracy are running in droves to see this. It's absolutely the degradation of society, wouldn't you think? Well, that leads me to my next critique, which is on Saint-Saens, who wrote Danse Macabre. I'm sure all of you will recognize this when you hear it. This critique was in the London Daily News. I've happened to notice a pattern here with London being very critical of these composers. This was on June 3rd, 1879. In his Danse Macabre, Saint-Saens has succeeded in producing effects of the most horrible, hideous, and disgusting sort. Among the special instruments of the score was the xylophone, the effect of which inevitably suggested, as doubtless intended, the clattering of bones of skeletons. Another and scarcely less hideous device was the tuning of the first string of the solo violin a half note lower than usual, and the reiteration of the imperfect fifth many times in succession. This piece is one of many signs of the intense and coarse realism that is entering into much of the musical composition, so-called, of the day. Manufacture would be more the proper term, and in some cases, very clumsy manufacture. This man, I'm assuming it's a man, women at this time really weren't part of literary critiques for major publications. He is critiquing the use of the xylophone in the orchestra, heaven forbid, that is depicting bones of the skeleton. Honestly, I think it's very clever writing, but at that time, to depict something like that was just unheard of. And then what he is referring to in the solo violin is that very, very characteristic theme in Danse Macabre, where they use the tritone, which is what he's calling the imperfect fifth. And it is the half step lower of the fifth. And it was also called the devil's interval, hence why Saint-Saens would have used it in this piece, in depicting this macabre and sort of scary scene. One of my favorite pieces. Well, we're wrapping up today's trash talk, and of course, as always, I couldn't leave an episode without bashing on Brahms, my least favorite composer. This one is from George Bernard Shaw, from The World, and this is November 9th, 1892. Brahms' Requiem has not the true funeral relish. It is so extricably and ponderously dull that the very flattest of funerals would seem like a ballet, or at least a danse macabre after it. So he's basically trying to say that Brahms' Requiem is so incredibly boring that even the most boring funeral would look exciting put up next to it. Yeah, that's about the extent of it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode today of Trash Talk. I will be doing this weekly. Leave me some comments down below on your thoughts on any of these composers, or if you have any trash that you would like to talk, I'd be glad to hear it. As always, thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to click the like if you like the video, subscribe, notification bell so you know when videos are coming out, and please share with your friends who might be interested. Maybe they'll learn a little something or at least be entertained. Hope to see you all soon. Until next time.